All right, we were studying the promises of Jesus. So let's go ahead and read Hebrews 10, verse 23 to 24, please.
Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds.
Thank you. All right, so my favorite definition of a promise is the reason to expect something. And when we're going through the promises of Jesus, we're seeing how we can expect something from God. Okay, so for today's lesson, and I heard some discussion earlier, what is the difference between sympathy and comfort? I actually went to Webster's for this, and there's actual difference there.
In my mind, sympathy is feeling for another,
Mm-hmm.
and comfort is felt within.
Okay.
That's just my difference.
To me, it's like, I don't know. Comfort is sympathy acted out. I don't know if that.
I like that one.
In action,
I like that
sympathy
one.
in action.
I'm gonna write that down. And that's what I found was that sympathy is the emotion, that feeling pity, feeling sorry for someone when you hear about tragedies like the plane crashes or the LA fires or the recent shooting in Sweden. You feel sorry for people and you feel bad about that. And you pray for people and you hope the best for people. You can't do anything. And that sympathy is the feeling. Comfort, and I really like that. That's that sympathy in action. Comfort is providing a sense of relief from pain or distress, actively trying to alleviate someone's suffering through words, gestures, or presence. And I like that last part too, because sometimes, I mean, when you think of Job's friends, if they had just sat there, kept their mouths zipped, they would have been a comfort. They had to open their mouths and start yapping, but yeah. But again, sometimes.
Like if you have something, and I'm not talking about anybody here, but sometimes if you have a problem, and you'll ask your friend, you know anything about this, and you want advice, but sometimes you get so many people telling you things that they don't know about. It's not much comfort.
What I've heard sometimes is someone will say, well, I had this, and then someone say, well, you think that's bad. That's not comfort.
Yeah.
No, that is not comfort at all. If I'm hurting about something, like, well, you just don't know about this. And
Let me tell you about mine.
right. That's not comfort. But comfort from God gives us strength and help in time of need. That is true comfort. He makes us strong, whatever our circumstances. Let's go ahead and read 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, please.
Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God.
Thank you. So we have a promise here that God is able to give us all comfort because he is in control of all the things that could take away our comfort, our joy, our peace. So we're going to look at 3 examples of God's comfort so that we can have confidence in the promise of God's comfort. We're going to look at some really bad situations and see how God comforted these men and just pull that forward and know that God will give us the same comfort. The first example is Paul, because we're right here with him needing comfort. Let's go ahead and read 2 Corinthians 1, verses 5 to 10.
For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also abounds through Christ. Now, if we are afflicted, it is for your consolation and salvation, which is effective for enduring the same sufferings which we also suffer. Or if we are comforted, it is for your consolation and salvation. And our hope for you is steadfast, because we know that as you are partakers of the sufferings, so also you will partake of the consolation. For we do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, of our trouble which came to us in Asia, that we were burdened beyond measure, above strength, so that we despaired even of life. Yes, we have the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead, who delivered us from so great a death and does deliver us, in whom we trust that he will still deliverance.
Thank you. All right. How was Paul afflicted? How was he hurting?
He's supposed to have the thorn in the flesh.
Well, we don't know. We don't know at this point what it is.
This, the trouble in Asia,
Some kind of trouble in Asia.
they were burdened
Yep.
beyond measure.
Yes, beyond measure, beyond what he could even describe. Verse 5, he said that he and those with him had suffered greatly. Verse 6, I have the word afflicted. I don't know what y'all have in verse 6. Afflicted, okay? That idea of afflicted is suffered persistent pain or distress. This wasn't a one-time thing and it's kind of, okay, everything's all better. This was persistent hurt, suffering greatly. It could have been some serious illness. It could have been the persecutions that he suffered a lot. Verse 8 and 9, they had been burdened so far beyond their strength that they were certain they would die. I've hurt before. I don't know how often I'm so burdened, so hurt that it's kind of like I can't survive this. I'm not going to say it's never happened, but again, that's where they are. If you've ever just felt like it's kind of, okay, there is no surviving this. And then he turns and relies on God, and God is his strength and his comfort. Certainly in 2 Corinthians 11, we read the list of how he was persecuted, the beatings, the dangers, the hardships that happened to Paul because he preached Jesus. And certainly would not be surprised that a bunch of those happened in Asia. But he's also written before about being ill or someone with him is very, very ill and almost dying. So we don't know what it was. How did God provide comfort to Paul?
He instilled in him trust
Mhm.
in God,
Right.
and he delivered him from a great death.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Verse 8 and 9, whatever the circumstance was, whatever the problem or burden was, it was bad enough that Paul was helpless and hopeless. He had to trust in God, and God answered his prayer. Verse 10 talks about how God provided help and strength. And whatever this was, it was life-threatening. But the actual event isn't what Paul is focused on, because otherwise he would put it down there. If that's what he wanted to focus on, he would have written, this is what happened, and boy, it was bad. But that wasn't the point. And the whole point was he wanted this to be able to apply to any circumstance, any burden, because what's a burden for one person isn't going to be a burden for another person. I've mentioned before, giving a friend a ride to church on a regular basis and just listening to her to complain about all her problems. Her parents paid her rent, they paid her school, it just, I was looking for a burden, but again, her burden is not, and I had to, check myself and say, okay, she is burdened. She's hurting over these things. I don't get it. but again, that is burden. That is a burden for her. So I think Paul purposely doesn't mention it, because then no one can say, oh, well, I don't have this, so I'm not really burdened. Or, oh, I have this, I'm really burdened, so it doesn't apply to me too. So what he's saying about God's comfort applies regardless of the burden. Whatever it was life-threatening. But what was important is to take a teaching moment. Again, that's Paul all the time. Take a circumstance, make a teaching moment out of it, and saying that God was able and willing to rescue. Yes.
But if you go on into 11, he does thank them for praying for them too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he shared this with others, that whatever their burden, they could also know that God is willing and able to rescue. And that's part of the idea of comfort, that you actually do something, even if you're just there with someone, to give them strength. Verse 10 is very interesting to me, because Paul states that God works for us in the past, the present, and future to give us comfort. He says in verse 10, he rescued us, he will rescue, and will yet rescue. So God is there to comfort us from any past hurts, because we all have past hurts that still linger on. And what we need to do is make sure they're not affecting us now. That doesn't mean that they go away, they're still there. But God is there for our past hurts, for our present hurts, and the hurts in the future, because they're still going to be coming.
Yay.
Sorry. Don't want to tell the end of the story, but
It's like thrilling today.
But again, Paul needed God's comfort for his past burdens. He persecuted Christ's church. He couldn't forget that. 1 Timothy 1:15, he calls himself the chiefest of sinners. Paul knew he was forgiven. The burden of that sin was taken away. by God, by the sacrifice of Jesus. But he's still going to remember that. He's still going to run into people who were related to someone that he threw in jail or anything like that. Or it's kind of like, remember when you, he's like, yeah, I remember that, but I am forgiven of that. So the burden of that is gone. The injuries he suffered listed in chapter 11 here would have been physically and emotionally traumatizing. That, I mean, that those kind of injuries, after a while, you don't keep recovering from them. And not to mention that, but I know for me, it's kind of like, hey, I get beat up every time I mention the name of Jesus. I don't know if I'm going to keep going. So there's that trauma, and he needed God's comfort so that he wouldn't let those past hurts prevent him from continuing to teach Jesus, because that would have been easy. I don't know that I would keep talking Jesus if every time I did, someone,
Different sound.
Later, I'll scare me.
So I have a question. How did God comfort him here specifically?
well, we don't know exactly. He delivered him. He said we were in danger of dying and we didn't die only because God delivered us.
Okay.
Don't know exactly what it was. Don't know if it was illness or persecution or what, but God was there for them to relieve them of that burden. And Paul knew that he needed God's comfort in the future. He knew that if he keep preaching Jesus, he would keep getting beat up. I mean, thrown in jail. And probably an even greater burden would be the betrayal of those who claim to be Christians, claim to be his friends. He writes about, I think about 10, 15 years later in 2 Timothy about Demas and Alexander, who deserted him and did him a great deal of harm. Those future hurts that we know are going to come along, that we still need strength to deal with.
And fellow Christians, when they do you wrong, it hurts so
Oh, yeah.
much more.
And it's so easy to get paralyzed by that. And it's so easy for people to turn away from God because of their hurts from others or from their circumstances. And it's just, I can't keep doing this. And we need that comfort. We need to know God will still be with us in the future. We don't have to be paralyzed to keep talking Jesus, because if I'd been Paul, I think I would have just been totally paralyzed by fear of what had happened before. But then again, but he kept going regardless, and we can have that same strength because we have the same comfort. And Paul says here that, and I think that's why he doesn't mention it specifically, so we can know we have the exact same comfort from God, the strength and the care from God that Paul had. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1 here, Paul wrote of a time when he felt helpless and hopeless, and yet he was comforted by God because he knew God was in control. And whether God took away the circumstance or not, because God didn't always do that for Paul. And whatever changed, Paul knew that God was in control. And maybe that's the only thing that changed, was that Paul knew because of Christ that God was in control.
Even Christ.
Yes,
When he
absolutely.
went to the garden.
Right.
And he
Didn't-
needed comfort.
He got comfort. He did not get a changed circumstance. And that I think is so important, because we've probably all seen people walk away from God because it didn't get better. Well, you didn't let it get better if you're just looking for circumstances to change, because circumstances, life repeats because bad things are going to come along again. How are you going to deal with that next one if you just want things to be taken away and made all better? I mean, that's why with kids, sometimes kids have to be allowed to fall down and get back up and be stronger, because otherwise, I heard about butterflies, that it's like, oh, poor little butterfly, let me help you out of your yeah, they'll die because they didn't do the struggle that they needed for the next challenge, because we all have those next challenges.
Today, the things that we suffer are not physical as Paul's. Sometimes we are.
Yeah.
Physically suffering, but many times it's an emotional
Mhm.
thing that we have to give up to God, and that's harder.
Yeah.
It seems to me that in my life it's harder because I have, well, not physically, but the hurts that
Mhm.
we feel that are internal.
Yeah.
are-
Well, I think you're right, because I
know.
think if someone would say, okay, if you're going to say you believe in Jesus, I'm going to punch you in the face.
Uh-huh.
Or if you keep saying you believe in Jesus, your child is going to walk away from you. I mean, which hurt is greater? I mean, it really, the emotional hurts, and Paul suffered both, totally.
That's like your
But
family members who don't believe.
yes.
And that they don't want you to even say the word Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
but you kind of try to slip it in.
Ever so
in
often, yeah.
conversations. But still that hurt that you
Mhm.
can't be that close to them.
And God can still comfort us. I mean, we still have the future promise that there's no tears in heaven. I don't understand that. If certain people aren't there, I don't understand how that promise is possible, but it's a promise. It's a promise, and so it'll be it'll be the case. But God's comfort gave
Well,
Paul.
tell me how he built the dinosaurs if you don't.
I know it.
I believe that's something what he asked Job.
Yeah, don't have all the answers, but I do know God's comfort gave Paul strength and relief from his burdens, and he in turn shared that comfort with the Christians in Corinth. And they were nasty to him, and he still wanted them to have the comfort that God promised. Any other comments about Paul's
It's
struggle?
probably why here that it doesn't tell us what the exact thing is, because we can put in our.
Yep. We can just say, okay, whatever it is, emotional, physical, anything that's happening around.
Because if they were saying that these people were throwing stones at us or whatever.
Right. Then we can say, oh, well, God only acts in that particular circumstance, but you don't understand my circumstance. Yeah, we tend to do that. And so Paul circumvented that. Paul was a smart guy. All right. Any other comments on Paul before we go on to Elijah?
Well, quick thing, we also didn't know what his thorn in the flesh was either.
Right. Apparently we didn't need to know. All right. So Elijah, a little bit of context. Elijah was a prophet during the time of King Ahab of Israel, some 900 years before Christ was born. 1 Kings 16. Keep pages in this humidity. 1 Kings 16 verse 30 reads, Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. When you read, this is why I didn't study the kings of Israel, because they were all horrible. Judah, the kings of Judah at least were occasionally pretty good. Because of Ahab's evil, God sent Elijah to him in 1 Kings chapter 17 and verse 1 reads, Now Elijah said to Ahab, As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall certainly be neither dew nor rain during these years except by my word. And James 5 tells us that drought lasted 3.5 years. There was a severe famine in the land. Okay, keep that in mind. And we're going to look at the history in 1 Kings chapter 18. 3.5 years have gone by. Okay, Elijah calls King Ahab, all of Israel. I assume that means all of the leaders, anybody who could go back and not there yet. And it calls all Israel, 450 prophets of Baal to Mount Carmel. And then in verse 21 of chapter 18, Elijah issues a challenge. He challenges the people of Israel, choose whom you're going to worship. I mean, stop straddling the fence, stop worshiping God on the Sabbath and Baal the rest of the week. That doesn't work. Make a choice. And the people don't say anything. It's kind of like, then you just picture the frustration of Elijah. Come on. Verse 23, so Elijah sets up a test. He says, okay, we're going to have 2 altars, 2 oxen that we're going to sacrifice, but there's a catch. In verse 24, he says, you call on the name of your God, and this is to the prophets of Baal, and I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. People thought that was a pretty cool idea. It doesn't read that way, but again, so he issues this challenge, and people are kind of like, cool, we're going to see a show here. And of course, we know that no matter how long the prophets of Baal shouted and jumped around, nothing happened. They went all day long. They jumped around, hooped and hollered. Let's go ahead and read 1 Kings 18, verses 37 to 39.
I'm 37, I'll read it. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that these people may know that you are the Lord God, and that you have turned their hearts back to you again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. Now, when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and they said, The Lord, he is God. the Lord, he is God.
I mean, this is an exciting moment. They've spent all day long watching the prophets of Baal just kind of jump around. They were cutting themselves. They were trying to get Baal's attention, and Elijah's heckling them the whole time. It must have been hilarious. He's saying, maybe he's asleep. Shout louder. Maybe at one point, maybe he's on the privy. Maybe all this kind of stuff. That's the translators kind of are a little nicer. But again, maybe he's gone on a trip. And so he's heckling them this whole time. And then as soon as Elijah prays, fire falls down. I mean, and we know the story that he had, poured water on it, soaked it, just soaked the whole thing, and dug a trench, filled the trench with water. And then
Possible.
yes, absolutely. He couldn't have lit it all day long with a match and a bunch of kerosene. But again, and immediately, and of course, the people respond with a great deal of emotion. The Lord is God, the Lord is God. And then they go home. Okay.
Good
It's,
show.
yeah, good show. Yay.
Starting
Um,
from the back.
Yeah. And then after that, in verses 41 to 45, Elijah prayed for rain. This is after 3.5 years of drought, and God sent rain. And verse 46 is really cool because Elijah has sent King Ahab on, down to the town, and Ahab has a chariot and horses. Okay, he's moving fast. Elijah is on the hill praying for rain. It starts to rain, and it says in verse 48, then the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he belted his cloak around his waist and outran Ahab in the chariot with the horses after he had a head start. So all of these things, this is great. This is exciting. God had kept Elijah alive during 3.5 years of drought and famine. He answered in answers to his prayer, fire literally fell from heaven. The people had shouted, the Lord, he is God. Everybody's all worked up. Because of his prayer, it's finally raining again. I mean, instantly, every time he prays, it's instant answer from God. God has given him the strength to outrun this chariot pulled by the king's horses. Elijah truly had a mountaintop emotional or spiritual experience, a moment of joy and amazement.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. So he has this, so all of this, spiritual excitement. And then we have chapter 19. Let's go ahead and read, and this is just a day or two later.
Jezebel.
Yep, going right there. 1 Kings 19, 1 to 4, please.
Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, so may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Then he was afraid, and he arose and went for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, it is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers.
Thank you.
I'm confused.
Okay. Why was Elijah distressed?
That's why I'm confused. He could just
It-
ask God for anything, and now it's like his faith has been shaken because of what she said.
But they were going around executing people.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he knew that she had been able to, as far as he was concerned, from chapter 18, verse, I've got it written down here. Verse 22, that he knew that Jezebel had killed all the prophets of God. So she's serious when she says she's going to kill him. She has the backing of the army.
Okay.
She has the army, she has the king's authority. But again, to your point, he's distressed over this. He's afraid and he's depressed. I mean, after this total, spiritual high, he's hit rock bottom. You don't ask God to let you die if you're not seriously depressed. God has done these great things in answer to Elijah's prayers, and yet it seems like right after, the people just kind of went home, and it's like, yay, great show, we're going to go home now. Jesus experienced the same thing with the miracles, because the miracles were intended to prove his words, but people wanted to see the show and ignore the words. And it's kind of like, okay, show's over, time to go home, go back to normal. Mhm.
Thinks that I'm wondering, did he feel, unworthy? He says, for I am not better than my fathers. I don't know. I
I
mean,
haven't done anything.
that's just a sign of depression,
Yeah.
I guess.
He
Maybe
was certainly
because he
depressed.
ran. I don't know, that was how I read it.
Maybe you're right.
I'm not sure, but, don't want to get too deep into Elijah because I want to focus on the comfort because Elijah would be a very interesting study all by himself. But again, but he's afraid. He's afraid and depressed. We can certainly see that in these verses
He's a
here.
human being.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but again, all these things and all this spiritual excitement, and then where'd the people go? They just kind of went back home. No one rallied around and said, "We'll protect you, Elijah. We're not going to let this happen." No,
He's depressed.
he's alone again.
Well, the thing is, you had the big high and then you had it's like you
Yeah.
go boom and then you're back to.
What
Right.
did I accomplish?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the main point here, I think, is that what did I accomplish? All of this effort 3.5 years later, and nothing's changed.
And it wasn't up to him to accomplish anything.
That's
Yeah.
true.
That's
And
what
he's
he
like,
said,
I
it's
can't
he's-
do
we do
anything,
that
just like the
ourselves.
previous prophets. And that may be part of it too. Cheryl, that may be part of what you're
I
saying.
think you're
I'm not
right.
better because I'm not
Yeah.
able to accomplish any more than all these previous prophets who have tried, you keep trying to reach out to Israel and
makes
not,
sense.
without making any difference. And so except for a moment of shouting and excitement, it probably didn't seem to Elijah like anything he did
How much
made any
time
difference at
passed?
all. Between the time that days, it was just kind of like, because as soon as Ahab got home and he ratted Elijah out to Jezebel sending the message, "I'm going to kill you too by tomorrow,"
Well, they
is
said
what
it
she
was
said.
raining in there, though.
Yeah, it rained. But Ahab is on his way back to Jezreel. And as soon as he gets there, he talks so it's just a couple of days because Jezebel is saying, by tomorrow, I'm going to kill you.
Reminds me of Moses and all he went through
Mhm.
with the Israelites.
Well, certainly.
She was a powerful woman.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Is
just
her
that
husband
By
to
the time he
her?
climbs to the mountain and that time he does all this, I don't know, I mean, it would take me a while to climb the mountain, you know?
Well, but he ran down the mountain.
He ran down the mountain.
Remember,
You
he
have to
don't
go
get
up
faster
the
than
mountain.
Yeah.
chariots.
Well, they went up the mountain. It was kind of, I don't know if it was actually, a long hike or anything like that, but they went up the mountain, had the sacrifice, and then he sent Ahab back to the city and prayed for rain, and then ran past Ahab toward the
Right.
city on the way
He was
back.
on-
So
he was-
so it
probably
was-
wasn't a very long time.
not a long time at all. And then Jezebel sends word, "I'm going to kill you by tomorrow."
And the
So-
only way he outran Ahab was because the hand of the Lord. was on
Exactly.
him.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah, not many people outrun a chariot.
Yeah. But again, the focus is Elijah needed God's comfort. He had past hurts. In chapter 18, verse 22, Elijah said, "I alone am left as a prophet of the Lord." And then even though these people were shouting, the Lord, he is God, when Jezebel says, "Okay, I'm going to kill you by tomorrow," there's no one around him. He's alone again. All these people have said, "Great show. Thank you. Going home now." In chapter 19, verses 10 and verse 14, Elijah said, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of armies, for the sons of Israel have abandoned your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they have sought to take my life." 3 different times it's recorded that he says, "I alone am left." He felt all alone, abandoned. There's nobody else trying to follow God, no matter what happens, no matter what I do. I'm it. That's depressing. Okay. And he's had enough. He felt totally alone. And, I wouldn't be surprised if Elijah didn't know some of those prophets that had gotten killed. Because, again, when you're,
Well, the
they would have
Lord
been,
treats us different now. I mean, he put us together to be an army.
oh yeah.
He was having to stand on his own.
Yeah. And he felt very alone. He thought he was the only one left. And that hurt, that past hurt of knowing that the prophets have been killed, knowing that he's alone, seeing that no matter what he does, it doesn't seem to make a difference. Those hurts seem to threaten to overwhelm him, that loneliness, that despair of making a difference. He needed God's help right then. He's in danger for his life. Jezebel is out to kill him. She's certainly capable of killing whomever she wants to. And God is there to give him help and strength. Twice in chapter 19, verses 5 to 8, an angel brings him food and water. because the journey is too great for him. So here, take your rest, take a moment, take a breather. Here's food and water. Get some more sleep. And then in verse 18, here's another comfort that God gives Elijah. He tells him that there are 7,000 who have not bowed to Baal. Elijah was not alone, and he was not a failure. Okay, and he needed to hear that from God. And he also needed, for the future, in verses 15 to 16, God tells him, it's kind of, okay, go and anoint this man king over Israel, because Ahab's not going to be king much longer. Go and find Elisha, and start training him as prophet. Elijah still had work to do. So when you're that depressed, and when you're that down and feeling like they're not making any difference, and God comes along, he says, you know what, I've got a job for you. It takes the focus off Elijah and says, okay, I've got more work to do. There is still those who are following God, who want to follow God. And as soon as he talks to Elisha, Elijah is following him and to be the next prophet.
I know I've told you that my granddad's had an old cow named Jezebel. And she'd get down in the creek bed every time she saw my mother and just butt her head against the creek wall. And so I can see Jezebel. She's mad at Elijah.
Yeah. Yeah. But not able to. She's butting her head against the wall because God won't let her kill him. And that's
I mean, I don't
that's
know.
pretty
It
good.
stays in my mind.
Yeah. Now it's stuck in mine. But those mountaintop spiritual experiences, those are great, but those emotions do not last. I mean, we've all had those. The emotions don't last, and they will not give us strength and help when we face our next burdens. What lasts is God's comfort. What lasts is depending on God. Any other comments about Elijah?
Well, I just think that when we put the focus on ourselves and how bad things are going with
Mhm.
us, if we do get in and work to do something for somebody else,
Yep.
it is much more comfortable.
And God saw what Elijah needed. He didn't need to focus on, oh, the people didn't respond. Oh, the people aren't going to respond. He needed to see this person is going to respond.
How many
Go
times
train this
have you
guy.
gone to someone, a death or a sickness, and said, if there's anything I can do, I'll do it. And if they give you a job, you feel so
Mhm.
that,
Mhm.
oh, I got to help them.
Yeah.
I know.
It's the, I don't know what to do.
Right. And so Elijah didn't have to depend on those, so many Christians depend on those mountaintop spiritual experiences. I've had people talk, oh, I just feel so good. I'm kind of like, how are you going to feel tomorrow? And what are you going to do when you don't feel so good tomorrow? But again, that, a job sometimes it's kind of, okay, I've got this work to do. Go ahead.
If any of y'all had kids to go to church camp, I'm sure y'all did. I thought church camp was great, but my kids would come home and they'd be so excited and uplifted and ready to do. And then unfortunately it was a big letdown.
And it is, because that emotion doesn't last. But what does last is God's comfort, because God always has a job for all of us. And again, if someone could take that opportunity and see that excitement and say, okay, now we're going to go do this. We're going to go mow so-and-so's yard that can't take care of this. We're going to go visit so-and-so. Then that could continue, because that excitement, that high emotion isn't going to last. We're just not built to have strong emotion like that, but we need that steady joy and comfort. Go ahead.
Also, when you become a new Christian and you're all gung ho and everything and
Mhm.
go, but over time, you live along, you live left.
But if you need to be careful that things don't just knock your legs out from under you, because,
But the thing is,
yeah.
as a good Christian,
Mhm. But
But-
what lasts, happy doesn't last, joy lasts.
Yeah.
And that depends on who we surround ourselves with.
True.
Yes,
The deeper.
it does.
That's why these stories that we read help us have the comfort of God,
Yes.
because we see they were great men,
Mhm.
great people.
And we still have the same comfort. Well,
We still have the
Elijah-
Same God.
James 5 tells us Elijah is a man just like us. And I'm kind of like, excuse me? He was a man who trusted in God, who prayed to God, who relied on God.
I
Okay,
think
yeah,
we-
he's a man just
we
like
see
us.
These men as better than us,
Mhm.
that they're capable of more, God deals with them more. They're not.
Right.
They're just examples.
Let's get to Jeremiah. Jeremiah was kind of a tough one. Why was Jeremiah called the weeping prophet?
People did not respond to him all the years that he spent teaching.
Yep. He actually, so many prophets warned Israel, warned them about the coming destruction. I mean, Isaiah, we read about that a lot in Isaiah. I mean, all these prophets sent to warn the destruction is coming, punishment is coming. You keep on sinning, punishment is coming. Jeremiah prophesied for about 40 years, warning, and then he actually witnessed the destruction. No one listened, of course. He witnessed Babylon overcome Jerusalem and take captives twice before the final and complete destruction of the city in about 586 BC. Isaiah didn't have to see it. These other prophets didn't have to see it. Jeremiah saw the actual destruction. And so he's called the weeping prophet. I mean, to know something's coming as he's prophesying, but then to live through
But
it.
we're prophets.
Yes.
We know what's coming.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And Jeremiah wrote the book of Lamentations after seeing the destruction of Jerusalem to try to describe the pain, the death, and the devastation that he had witnessed. Let's go ahead and read Lamentations 3, verses 1 to 3, and then verses 17 and 18, please.
Who has seen affliction.
Wait,
Oh,
what do you read?
Lamentations 3, 1 to 3, and then 17 and 18.
Okay, thank you.
I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. He has led me and made me walk in darkness and not in light. Surely he has turned his hand against me time and time again throughout the day. You have moved my soul far from peace. I have forgotten prosperity, and I said, my strength and my honor have perished from the Lord.
Okay. He's describing here, and these are a series, Lamentations is a series of poems describing the destruction, describing just the devastation there. Jeremiah lived a lonely, painful, sometimes physically painful, frustrating life, and yet he was comforted by God's promise to bless his people. He relied on things like in the book of Jeremiah, all of chapter 23, chapter 30, chapter 31, God promised over and over to restore Judah, to restore Jerusalem, to save that remnant. So all this time that that Jeremiah is having to prophesy, this is coming. It's right around the corner. You're still rejecting God. This is right around the corner, and yet God is going to comfort us. And so many verses in those, especially those chapters, is comfort from God after the destruction, because God's going to save that remnant. And he's going to bring them back, and he's going to prosper them. Jeremiah 29:11 says, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for prosperity and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. Okay. So even though Jeremiah lived through the destruction, even though he was forced by some of the people who survived the destruction to go into Egypt, even though he told them, God says, don't go to Egypt, he never saw the rebuilding. And yet he knew that God had promised that. He knew that was coming, that the people would be, that the line of David would not be broken. I mean, that's an amazing thing right there. All these attempts to break the line of David so that Jesus would not fulfill that prophecy, that's not going to happen. Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt. The wall is going to be rebuilt. The temple will be rebuilt. Those promises are there. And that was a comfort to Jeremiah, even though he wouldn't see that. He knew that God had made those promises. He was given strength and help by God. So in the midst of unimaginable death and destruction, I mean, the place, Jerusalem, was leveled. It was, I mean, when you read in the end of 2 Chronicles, all of the destruction and what they did in destroying that, and the death, all the death, it just, I can't imagine it. I mean, it's like DC is just leveled and everybody in it killed.
Like when Japan got bombed.
Yeah, just leveled. And
But it didn't
again,
go that quick. but-
Jeremiah was able to write these words of comfort to, he was able to be comforted by God because of God's promises that he's going to be with his people regardless. And he was able to comfort others. Let's go ahead and read Lamentations 3, verse 22 to 24,
Okay, I have a
please.
question.
Uh-huh.
Why was he distressed?
Because he'd seen the destruction of Jerusalem.
Oh.
Okay. And just, I mean, he'd seen the death. I mean, he was actually had been thrown in prison because he was still preaching about the destruction of Jerusalem when and others were saying it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen, even though Babylon was at the gate. They're saying, oh, it's not going to happen. He was thrown in jail because he was still preaching that. And then he's brought out by the Babylonians after they've destroyed everything. And then they say, whatever you want, Jeremiah, they knew who he was. And he was just allowed to stay there or go with them, whatever he wanted. But you're let out of jail and you see rubble and you see the bodies. And that's what he experienced. So yeah, that's pretty distressing. But again, the comfort is that God had promised him all along as well, through his and we see that in his writings, that the remnant is going to survive, the people are going to come back, and it's
Not
going to be
only that.
rebuilt.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, something, even though we didn't see it and he did, we all had emotions.
Yeah. And that was in my backyard. So it was kind of, so yeah, it's but he writes these words of comfort. Let's go ahead and read Lamentations 3:22 to 24.
The Lord's loving kindnesses never, indeed never cease, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I have hope in him.
Thank you.
We sing that.
Yeah, we sure do. And that comes right after him saying, looking around at all this destruction, and he writes those words. I mean, that's like, what's the song? Where the guy had lost his family in the voyage. It is well with my soul. And he gets a cable from his wife, I alone survive. And he writes, it is well with my soul. Someone who's faced devastation and still knows and still understands and gets comfort from God because God promises. That'll give me shivers every time. All right. Any comments about Jeremiah? Jeremiah is a tough one, but he would be an interesting study as well.
So God comforted him through his promises?
Yes.
Okay.
Because we don't talk about Jeremiah too much.
No, because Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah is a little tough to parse as far as how things go because he, and then he also just lived a very tough time. I mean, you think, studying any of the kings is, I mean, this is when the punishment actually happens, is during his lifetime. But when you read the chapters in Jeremiah, you read chapters 23, chapter 30, chapter 31, and just the promises of God, just the whole thing is, I will comfort my people. And God says over and over, I will comfort my people. He's going to punish, but there's that promise that's coming. Yes.
I just happened to open up and I was looking and it talking about how the women boiled their children. Did he live? He saw all that.
Yeah, he was in Jerusalem when they were under siege for those couple, I think 2 years. Because the siege, the whole purpose of the siege is to cut off supplies
That's very
and
disturbing.
starve people out and all the destruction there. Yeah, all of that led up to it. And in the midst of that, he is actually thrown into a sewer pit, basically, almost dies there because he won't stop talking repent. He won't stop preaching repentance. So, and then he's pulled out of the sewer pit because he's going to die there. And then he's thrown into jail. And then Babylon breaches the wall and destroys Jerusalem. Anyway, I want to get to I want to focus on verses 22 and to 24, where he says, I have hope in God. Circumstances don't matter because God's comfort is always there, regardless of our circumstances. We can always get strength and help from God. Doesn't matter how bad things get. All right. Focusing on it.
22, how does your, Cheryl, verse 22, how did yours read?
The Lord's loving kindness indeed never cease.
Mine says, through the Lord's mercy, we are not consumed.
I like that. Right, so 2 Corinthians 1, verse 3 and 4 reads, Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we will be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. We've all felt hurts and burdens in the past and losses, probably some measure of those right now, physical problems, whatever is going on right now. And if not now, certainly in the future. I mean, bad things keep happening. Burdens still happen. Well, what are we going to do when those happen? And I believe that what makes a bad situation worse is feeling a lack of control or feeling threatened. Because when you don't feel like there's any control or you feel threatened, then these bad things that are happening are just so much worse.
The unknown.
Yeah,
We don't know what's gonna go around the corner.
right. But we can know that God is in control. That takes away so much of what hurts us. Knowing that God is in control, that whatever is around the corner, God already knows it. God already is taking care of it. And we can know that he is our protector. There are things that I can't control. There are things that I can't overcome by strength of will or strength of body or whatever. And yet I can know God does. And he can do that for me, that he is my protector, that he is in control. And that is such a comfort. Just knowing that is a comfort. So those past hurts that want to crop up ever so often and just kind of, talk in our ear and throw us off. God can comfort us from those, and he can keep those from being have any kind of control over right now. Anything that's going on right now, God is in control, and he's going to protect us. He's going to comfort us. Anything that can come around, because who's afraid of the future sometimes? Because the future, bad things keep happening. This old world, things don't get better in this world. This world is filled with entropy, and it's filled with sin and death.
No, first.
Sorry, but again, God is in control. God is our protector.
This is not my home. I'm just.
Yes,
that just
absolutely.
came right to my mind.
Absolutely.
Saying a little card that says, don't be afraid of tomorrow. God is already there.
Exactly. And that actually segues right into Jeremiah 1 verse 8. God told a very young Jeremiah, do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to save you. Okay. Anything that's happening now, anything that could happen to us, do not be afraid of it, for I am with you, says the Lord our God. That will make me feel good. Okay. Bad things happen. Misery is a choice. So, all right. Any other thoughts before we finish up here? Okay. God is able to give us all comfort because he is in control of all things, and that could take our comfort, that could take our joy, that could take our peace. Nothing can take God from us. That's an amazing thought right there. And that peace and that joy that God promises us, nothing can take that from us. Now we can decide, but God says it's here. I'm right there for you. God promises comfort. He promises strength. What true comfort is, strength and help whenever we need him. Because of God's comfort, we can decide that past burdens will no longer control us, that present burdens will not overcome us, and that future burdens will not frighten us, because God is there. He is in control. He is there for us. And just like these men, we can do more than survive. We can thrive. Anybody that can write what Jeremiah wrote wasn't going to be destroyed by what he saw, regardless of how bad it was. He hoped in God, and so he was not going to be overcome. Elijah, who was in danger of being overcome by his depression, God was there for him, and he was not overcome. Paul, we've read all that happened to Paul. Just reading the list is overwhelming, and yet Paul thrived. He didn't just survive it and say, okay, I'll go off into this corner and hide for a while. He thrived, and he helped others.
He ate his spinach.
Yes, I don't know what, but he sure did. Okay. But there is still work to do. We see with each of these examples, there's still work to do. And that's part of that comfort, is giving it to somebody else. I want to finish up here from Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah 40 verses 20, starting in verse 28. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might, he increases power. Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. Thank you so much for your time and for your comments.